Welcome in This Week in Indiana Football, episode number 8, brought to you by Indiana Sports Beat Radio, as always, Monday through Friday on YouTube and 97.7 The Ref in Evansville and WBRO in Marengo. Joining me, as always, Dustin Schutte from Saturday Tradition. And here in a little bit, we're going to be joined by a Penn State man from CNHI Papers, Mr. Elton Hayes. So we're looking forward to that. Indiana back in action this week against Penn State. They're coming off an interesting non-conference victory against WKU. I'm not really sure. Whenever I do the show, Dustin always knows. I tell him about how. First of all, you can hear me, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can hear you.
Okay. So I have to go through this process when we transition from the intro into the show, where I turn off where I can hear myself in the headphones, because when I don't do that, I lose my train of thought, as I just did, which is why I went into it like that. But Indiana played a football game again this past week, a close one against the WKU Hilltoppers, 33-31 down in Bowling Green. First off, I hope Indiana stops scheduling these games on the road against a group of 5 opponents. There is no reason that any Power 5 team should go on the road and play anybody from the group of 5.
Yeah, and I don't know if this was a 2-for-1 or what the deal was. Usually if you see a Power 5 team go on the road to a place like this, there's some sort of 2-for-1 deal. I know that some other teams have done it. I remember Michigan State going up to, I think, Western Michigan a few years ago. Purdue went out to Nevada. Minnesota signed a home-and-home with Fresno State. So it's not uncommon. I just don't know the benefit in terms of the Big Ten or in terms of a Power 5 team doing that. Certainly you don't see a team like Michigan or Ohio State or Penn State doing that ever, or, often, or if at all. So, yeah, there was really no benefit to that game. And I think the home field advantage really played a factor in the outcome of that game.
And I do believe that, speaking of which, Indiana will travel to Cincinnati next year as well after facing them at home this year. Now, obviously, Cincinnati is a different kind of group of 5 opponent, and so it doesn't seem like such a why are we going here kind of game. Well, and plus they'll be joining the Big 12. They won't be in the American Athletic Conference anymore by then, I don't think, correct?
Well, I don't know when the game's scheduled for, and I don't know when all this.
Well, they were back-to-back years. I don't remember when Cincinnati joined the Big 12 Conference, though, is what I'm trying to remember.
I don't know either, to be honest with you. But the thing is you never know when these teams are going to be good. Sometimes these games are scheduled when, a team is really, really good, and then it ends up 8 years down the road, they're awful. Sometimes it just happens. They're just scheduled so far ahead of schedule. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. You might schedule a really, I'm sure that there are times when, again, go back to Minnesota. They scheduled and played a pretty good Fresno State team. I don't know what Fresno State was like when they were first on the schedule. They might have thought that was going to be an easy win, but in both cases, it came down to the wire. So you never know this far in advance, but so it's hard to tell. Maybe Cincinnati was good at the time and Indiana wanted to get that kind of quality opponent on the schedule. Cincinnati does a pretty good job of scheduling those home and homes, though. So they've been able to get some Power 5 teams to Nippert Stadium. So is it even still Nippert Stadium? I know
it is. I do think they went through some sort of renovation, but I don't necessarily think it's the Nippert Stadium of old.
Right. That's what I'm not 100% sure. I'm not up on my AAC stadium.
So anyway, Indiana down in Bowling Green this past weekend. Michael Penix, that was the big storyline going into the game. Was he going to be able to play a clean game, put up a bunch of yards? He did do that. He was 35 for 53, 373 yards, no touchdowns, but also no interceptions. Jim and Kevin were talking this morning, and I think I agree. I don't think I've ever seen a stat line with someone who has that many yards and doesn't throw a single touchdown.
Well, that's probably
definitely an odd stat.
Right, or an interception. To throw that many passes and not have an interception or a touchdown, it's got to be pretty rare. I wonder what the record is for most passing yards in a game without a touchdown or without an interception or something. It's probably more leaning towards the touchdown, because you think when you accumulate that many yards, there's got to be at least a few big plays thrown in there, and you'd expect one of those to get into the end zone. But it didn't happen. But I think the key statistic there is the 0 interceptions, as we talked about, because Michael Penix in those 2 games against Iowa and against Cincinnati, he had 6 interceptions. And you just couldn't have that. We talked about this last week about this being a team that if Indiana wasn't prepared to play, they would end up getting beat. And I think
they were close to that happening.
I was going to say, I think they came out prepared to play. They jumped out. Was it a 14-3 lead or a 14-0 lead?
14-0, yep.
They jumped out to an early lead. I thought they came ready to play, and they still almost got beat. So he had to play a clean game because little mistakes like that throughout the course of a game that close could be the difference between 2-2 and 1-3. And he played well enough to get the job done. You'd like to see him get some touchdowns under his belt, but the big key is that they were able to get into the end zone enough. He didn't make the big mistake, and he was pretty accurate. He completed 35 of those 53 pass attempts, so that's pretty good.
And on the other end of things, you got WKU. We knew they had a prolific offense. They were supposedly the best offense in the country coming into last week. Obviously, when you see stats like that early on, you can only take that kind of stuff with a grain of salt because likely WKU isn't really the best offense in the entirety of the FBS. Now, we'll see how the season plays out, but against Indiana, they definitely had a very high-powered offense. They put up 31 points. Bailey Zappi went 31 for 44, 365 yards. He had 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. And one thing in particular about this offense that I noticed, and Mitchell Page actually noticed this too whenever Jim did his Monday evening quarterback last night, this WKU offense played almost an identical brand of football from back when Kevin Wilson was coaching the Indiana Hoosiers a few years ago. And it's the kind of offense that you run, I feel like, is you don't see very many top teams using a big hurry-up style air raid offense. But I feel like Indiana uses kind of offense, and now WKU is using it, to get the most out of what their personnel has because they know they don't have the talent that a Big Ten team is supposed to have. And so whenever you're running a hurry-up style offense, you give yourself a chance to make a play when the defense isn't ready. And they caught Indiana on their heels pretty much the entire game, especially once they got going. I know it was kind of a slow start for them, but once they got their foot going on offense, it became a really difficult thing for Indiana to stop. And from what I can say, and obviously me being somebody who has grown up watching Indiana and has my own opinion about them, I do still think this is a good Indiana defense, but they went up against a very good Western Kentucky offense. Yes, I know they're from Conference USA, but at the same time, I don't know that I fault them completely for giving up what they did in this game being as close as it was. Obviously, it doesn't look great just on paper when you see that you only beat Western Kentucky 33-31. But this is a WKU team that I think next week or this week specifically is going to put up points on Michigan State. I'm not saying they're going to go up to East Lansing and win, but I think we're going to be surprised at what they do on the road against the Spartans this Saturday.
Well, I mean, the unique thing about this is Western Kentucky's offense is probably not one. I mean, they're going to see something similar Indiana will this weekend against Penn State because they like to get up to the line and move the ball and snap it pretty quickly as well. But those teams tend to want to move quickly and have that kind of finesse game because their offensive linemen aren't usually built the same way you see offensive linemen at Wisconsin or Iowa or some of these other places. So you're able to use that to your advantage. And so I don't think Indiana's going to see kind of an offense like that exactly the rest of the season. And look at a perfect example of this is why is Purdue able to beat Iowa? It's because Purdue's their offensive approach is so unique that even though when Iowa has a great defense, you can find gaps in it. And so I think that's kind of similar to what happened on Saturday in Bowling Green. I think that there were just certain things that Indiana's defense was not prepared for, things that won't see throughout the rest of the Big Ten season.
Yeah.
So there's going to be some issues there. And we don't know how good Western Kentucky is. They very well might give Michigan State a scare, and they could pull off an upset. This has been a crazy college football season. But again, you can kind of take the final result with a grain of salt. A win is a win. You found a way to win. That's the most important thing. Go back to Minnesota in 2019 when it beat South Dakota State, Fresno State, and Georgia Southern in the first 3 games of the season, all by 1 possession. And I believe they were all 3 comeback victories. Those are FCS and Group of 5 opponents, and they weren't great that year. So, and Minnesota went on to win 11 games, beat Auburn in the Outback Bowl. So I think the important thing is that your offense played well. Michael Penix played well. Your defense had some struggles, but most importantly, you were able to get out of there with a win, get to 2-2, and now you carry some momentum with you into. I mean, I cannot imagine the mindset of that team if they walked in to Beaver Stadium with a 1-3 record. So, I don't think the point total or your margin of victory matters that much. Just the fact that you got the win, got back to 500 is what's key, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely important as well. A lot of the players during the press conferences were talking about how it's just important to be back on that winning side, to have momentum carrying you into a game of this kind of magnitude. I mean, this is a game that coming into the season against Penn State that a lot of people thought was going to be some gigantic marquee matchup between two top 10 teams. And just because it's not doesn't mean that it can't be a good game, but the luster of it is gone just based on the fact of what Indiana has done through the first couple of weeks of football.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the two different programs. I mean, Indiana, the two teams they've played, they've gotten beat by multiple scores, the two big-time opponents in Iowa and Cincinnati. So now you got to go on the road and try to play a Penn State team that's playing red-hot football right now. I can understand why there's a little bit of that luster gone out of the sails for that matchup, because it's, I mean, the way they performed, the way they performed in that Iowa game, and then to shoot themselves in the foot consistently in that game against Cincinnati, those are some areas of concern. So, like I said, it's good that they got this win, but you go in to play a Penn State team that James Franklin said on Tuesday during his press conference that he didn't, he wasn't thinking about revenge. He just wanted to beat Indiana.
Oh, come on. You can't not. I'm so tired of this coach speak. I don't care what program you coach for, what team you play for, whatever it may be. What is it? Why can't they just come out and say, we want to kick their ass? I mean, they don't have to be that vulgar about it if they don't want to, but it's obvious. It didn't matter what James Franklin said. They know they want revenge. You know that he's using that as some sort of motivator, just even if it's just for fun, to get them really riled up. Like, there's no reason for them to be motivated. They have a motivation. They want to win a Big Ten title. They want to go to the college football playoff. But at the same time, it's there. That game last year ruined their season effectively. They went 0-5 to start the 2020 season, and it spiraled because of the way that that game happened. They had the game won. Indiana purposefully let, I think it was Devin Ford, run into the end zone. And if that doesn't happen, the game's over. That one event triggered everything else to happen in that game and for the outcome to end up the way that it did.
Yeah, it's so ironic. The worst play of Penn State's season was a touchdown run. I mean, I don't know how else you would send that. That's got to be one of the craziest things. And it kind of is almost a microcosm of how 2020 was, not just in football, the world. Coaches are experts. Kirk Ferentz is really good at this too. Don't give the opponent any sort of bulletin board material. I mean, coaches are experts in this. Some coaches don't care. They'll say whatever they want, and then they'll get beat by 40 points. James Franklin's really good at it. Kirk Ferentz is really good at it. Just being quiet, respecting the opponent. Tom Allen's actually really good at it too.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like it's all coach speak. It's all they don't want to give any. And I think last year, specifically with Tom Allen, he had to do it in the bowl game. And I can't remember, for some reason I'm blanking on the specifics of what it was. They were dealing with the College Football Playoff Committee not giving them a New Year's Six bowl. And he wasn't giving them anything to go off of that. Instead of being fired up about it, he had to contain himself. But let's go ahead and bring in Elton Hayes from CNHI Papers up in State College. Thanks for joining us, Elton. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you?
We're doing good. We were just talking about Dustin had brought up James Franklin's press conference, talking about, or someone had asked him about if there's any sort of revenge factor, if he's been talking about that at all. And obviously he used typical coach speak and said that he's not thinking about that. It's just kind of the next game and all that kind of stuff. What is your point of view from somebody who covers Penn State? It doesn't have to be necessarily within the team, but just within the fan base. How motivated is everybody just to have Indiana come into town after what happened last year and what it did to Penn State's season?
Look, Franklin, I guess he could speak for the team and for his players in saying that they're not looking at this as a revenge game. But I can tell you, Penn State fans have been waiting almost a year for this, man.
Oh man,
it was Indiana's, I believe, first win against a top 10 team in 33 seasons. It sent Penn State on its worst 5-game start in school history. The Penn State Nittany Nation, man, they're ready for this one. They want revenge, and they have not been quiet about it.
Yeah, and I think it's clear to know that Penn State is definitely, at least as of right now, the biggest contender in the Big Ten East and looking to get to the Big Ten championship and maybe even a college football playoff. A lot of that was evidenced when they took down Auburn a couple of weeks ago. I was looking at the highlights earlier. One thing that really stood out to me in comparison to what Indiana has struggled with, Sean Clifford has seemed to have a lot of success based on how well his offensive line is protecting him. Would you say that's true?
It is, and it's something that Franklin was asked about earlier today, and he kind of mentioned Penn State through the first 4 games hasn't been as effective in the run game as I guess Franklin or any of the fans hoped it could be. But if you look at his protection, the offensive line has done very well with protecting Clifford, and it shows in the statistics. He's having he's off to one of the hottest starts of any quarterback in the Big Ten, and I can throw that in there nationally. He's taking care of the football. He's moving the ball downfield. He's giving time to go through his progressions, and that offensive line has played a big role in ensuring that success early this season.
Dustin?
And Elton, I think one of the interesting things that you point out is that Penn State's rushing attack maybe statistically hasn't been where everybody thought it would be, considering the backfield that they have, great running backs. But I feel like a little bit of that is kind of by design. The way that Mike Yurcich's offense operates, it's kind of an extension of the run game when you get the ball out to the receivers so quickly. I mean, is that kind of what you're seeing as well, or do you think that this team legitimately has some struggles establishing the run game?
Well, that's a good point you bring up. One thing I will say, this is something I asked Noah Kane about a couple of weeks ago, was I noticed in this offense I guess the premium that Yurcich places on getting the football to his running backs out of the backfield. Noah Kane, his pass catching yards, his receptions, they were definitely improved from last year. I think that's a good point. If you look at the way that they do the screens with Clifford throwing those tunnel screens out there to Dotson, Parker Washington, and Keandre Lambert-Smith, it is an extension of the run game. And hey, I wrote a story about Keandre Lambert-Smith's role in year 2. He had an 83-yard touchdown that was, kind of, you can look at it as an extension of the run game. The pass game broke down. Clifford tossed it out to him about 5 yards downfield, and he turned it into an 83-yard touchdown. So that's a good point, and that's one that really hasn't been talked about or examined. But I think that's a fair point.
Elton, there's been, I'm not sure how much you've been able to see of Indiana since you covered Penn State, but obviously there's been a lot of struggles against top teams so far. And then you have what happened against Iowa, and then you have the collapse against Cincinnati. I still think Indiana has the prowess to compete with any top team in the conference, but at the same time, they haven't put together a complete game to really have that fully evidenced. From your perspective, what do you see as Indiana's maybe biggest strength against Penn State in particular?
Honestly, right now, I think just the recency factor. Indiana's a team started the year, I believe, 18th or 17th in the country. A lot of hype coming in. They haven't lived up to that. I think a lot of that has to do with the schedule they've played. Iowa is the 5th best ranked team in the country right now. Cincinnati's the top 10 team. The game against Western Kentucky was a little concerning. I still need to go back and rewatch that one. But, look, Tom Allen's got these guys really believing on defense. I know last year that they were just a machine turnover-wise. It looked like every time I watched the Indiana game, somebody was forcing a turnover, whether it was Tywan McMullen or Micah McFadden. But I think, honestly, the biggest thing with Indiana and Penn State right now is just Penn State having that in the back of their mind,
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of those turnovers, Indiana has absolutely not been the turnover machine this year that they were last year. And I think that's cause for concern. I don't think that their defense necessarily needs to turn over everybody that they play against. But when you're in big games and you're not coming up with interceptions against someone as prolific as Sean Clifford right now, I think it's something that you can't really expect to win unless you're winning the turnover battle in a game like this.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and that's something that Penn State's been able to do. If you look at the that 5-game losing streak that they started the year on last year, their numbers in the turnover battle were horrible. I think at this point last year, Clifford had 5 or 6 interceptions. You look at him right now, I believe he's thrown I did not go to the game last week because I've been out with a really bad cold, but I believe he's got 8 touchdowns to 2 interception ratio. They're winning the turnover battle, and that's no coincidence that they're doing so well right now.
And one of the matchups that I think could be, I'm just going to say it, I think it could be disastrous for Indiana, is when you look at how well this Penn State defense has played. Up front, we've talked about that this may not be Penn State's best defensive line, but it's still really good. I really love what I'm seeing out of these linebackers and Brandon Smith and Ellis Brooks. I like how they're using Jesse Luketa right now. And then you look at the secondary and Jair Brown, Jaquan Brisker, Tarek Castro Fields. I mean, I don't know the way Indiana struggles to run the football, and with Michael Penix's inconsistency, I mean, I get the sense that, and I don't have to spoil anything for what we're going to talk about later, John, but I get the sense that this could potentially get really ugly if Indiana doesn't figure something out on the ground because of how well Penn State's defense has played through the first 4 games.
I think that's a really good point. The secondary this year, heading into the year with just the experience coming back and then the talent from young guys like Joey Porter Jr., who started for the first time as a freshman last year at cornerback. The linebacker or the secondary group this is expected to be Franklin's deepest and most talented, and those boys, they have not disappointed. Jair Brown, as you mentioned, he's got 2 turnovers this year. Jaquan Brisker, he came back for his senior season. He's been just like the heartbeat and the leader of that defense. You couple that with Brandon Smith's athletic ability. Curtis Jacobs has really exploded on the scene as a first-year starter at linebacker, and it's pretty well-rounded. On that defensive line, though, the contributions of guys like Derek Tangelo, Arnold Ebiketie, 2 transfers who came over and joined the Nittany Lions this offseason. The defense is looking really good right now.
And I think
go ahead, Dustin.
I think the thing that impresses me, I go back to this Elton week 1, and I know you were in Madison, but I'm sure you've talked with people, you got the quote and everything, but the way that Brisker described those last kind of couple of interceptions, I mean, the way he talked about, I saw the running back, take this angle, and I knew that I needed to cover the tight end to come up with that interception, and the way he kind of detailed and is talking to his teammates. I mean, to me, the reason I'm so high on Penn State is because I think this is more than just talent. This is a team, to me, especially on the defensive side, that is gelling together. They're really intelligent. I mean, that group's football IQ is really, really high.
It is. You've got Jair Brown, who's a senior. You've got Tarek Castro Fields, a 5th-year senior. Jesse Luketa, who's seen a lot of things. Brandon Smith, he started as a freshman, or he played a lot as a freshman in 2019. He's a junior right now, but his confidence, his football intellect is off the charts. It's a smart defense. A lot of these guys have played a lot of football. I mentioned the 2. Tangelo and Ebiketie, they came over from programs where they started, in previous years. So it's all kind of gelling together for them right now.
Dustin, back to what you were saying about Indiana struggling in the run game. And I think this is definitely a legitimate concern, obviously, against a team with a defensive line like Penn State. If the running game isn't able to get going, the passing game with the struggles it's already been having against top teams, now you have to add in the fact that DJ Matthews is out for the year, who's been having a phenomenal season. He's been kind of that replacement for Whop Phillier. People like Javon Swinton or Miles Marshall, if Indiana's going to have a chance, are going to have to step up in that role for DJ Matthews.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to what I said in week 1 heading into that Iowa game. If Indiana's going to have to throw the ball 50 times because they can't get anything on the ground, they're going to get blown out. There's no other way around it. And the fact that Michael Penix has struggled the way he has through these first 4 games, I mean, he played really well against Western Kentucky, but
he threw the ball 50 times in that game, 53.
Yeah, but are you comparing Western Kentucky's defense to Penn State's?
Well, here's what I'm saying is if you're throwing 50 times against Western Kentucky, you can obviously expect a problem against Penn State. You shouldn't have to throw the ball 50 times in a group of 5 against a group of 5 team.
Okay, we're on the same page. I thought you meant that he was successful against.
No, yeah. You can be successful. I mean, they only won by 2 points, obviously, but my point was what you were going with.
Yes, exactly. And so you've got to do something you've almost got to slow the game. Penn State found a way to win that game against Wisconsin in week 1. Even though the game was really slowed down, Wisconsin controlled the game for they had the ball for 43 minutes, I think. But Penn State was able to create some turnovers. Indiana's going to have to establish something on the ground. And I talk about that every week, but it's just so important when you're playing this many good defenses in the Big Ten, especially the Big Ten East. I mean, this is not the end of it, but I think Penn State is probably one of the top 2-3 defenses in the Big Ten right now when you look at Wisconsin and Iowa. So I just keep going back to it. If Michael Penix is back in the pocket, they don't have the same type of receiver. They don't have a Watt Fillier like they had last season, especially with DJ Matthews going down now. They've got to figure something out because they don't last year, Indiana did have an extension of the run game with Fillier at wide receiver. This year, they just don't have it.
Elton, 1 or 2 more questions before we let you go. What would you say, and I don't think that I asked this specifically earlier, but hopefully I didn't. What would you say is Penn State's biggest concern when going up against Indiana, whether it be the offense or the defense? Who's the player? And I feel like I could answer this for you, but I don't want to do that. Who are you keeping your eye on if it's going to be whether it's the defense or the offense, a specific player?
I'm keeping my eye on just right now that running back room. That right now the offense is clicking. The wide receiver unit's taken care of, the tight ends. All 3 of those guys have over 130 yards against Auburn. I'm keeping my eye on that running back room. So that starts with Noah Cain, John Lovett, Kevon Lee. I'm sorry, my thoughts are all over the place right now. I hopped up on
You're good.
Medicine. But I think it starts with them because here's the thing: it's not going to get any easier the deeper you go into this Big Ten schedule. And if Penn State wants to continue to pass the ball downfield and be effective that way, they're going to have to keep defenses honest with that run game. So it starts this week. It really does.
Dustin, you have anything else?
No, did you want to get his final score prediction? I've asked all the questions.
Yeah, I was going to get to that if you didn't have anything else. But
yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
You don't have to give us a prediction. I know you're a writer and you've got things you've got to take care of, and I don't know what your restrictions are, but if you would like to share a score prediction, feel free to give us what you think is going to happen this weekend.
I'm going to say Penn State 31, Indiana 17.
Okay, I think that's really anything's believable. With the current college football season right now, I don't think I would be surprised if anything happened this week with Indiana and Penn State.
I just Penix, there's something we know what's off with him. He's coming back from that injury. And the way that I've seen that Penn State defense kind of get to quarter, even if they weren't getting sacks against Auburn a couple weeks ago, they weren't getting to Bo Nix, but that defensive line, they were hitting them. And I'm curious to see how that's going to take its toll on Penix and with the mind state that he's already in with, trying to get back to trusting his athletic ability and trusting that, that injured leg. I think it's going to be very interesting. But yeah, I'm going to go with 31-17 Penn State.
All right. Well, Elton, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jim Coyle's producer, so I'll see you tomorrow on Jim's show in the morning.
Sounds good, man. Look, I look forward to it.
I appreciate it. We'll see you, Elton.
All right. Take care.
All right. So that was Elton Hayes from CNHI Papers up from State College, giving us his inside scoop on what the Nittany Lions look like heading into this Indiana game this Saturday night.
And I'm going to give him a credit too because he's a great writer. Indiana fans, he'll give you great Penn State insight. So if you want more information on the game, be sure you read some of his stuff. And he's the nicest. I mean, he is people I've had the opportunity to meet. I mean, he was nice to me at Big Ten Media Days a few years ago for no reason. I mean, he's just a great guy. So I have to, and for him to jump on here kind of last second, I really appreciate that from him.
Yeah, we definitely both appreciate it. And so, Dustin, I want to get back to something that you said. And I'm not going to disagree with you because I don't know that there's anything for me to disagree with. But you said earlier that you think that this game could get ugly quickly. or maybe you didn't say the word quickly, but maybe that is what you mean when you say ugly in general. What is the main issue that you see with Indiana that will keep this from being something that could be close or maybe should be close? I don't know.
There's a lot of things, in my opinion, kind of playing a factor in this game, and I don't know that all of it is within Indiana's control. This game is being played in Beaver Stadium at night. I know it's not a whiteout game.
The stripe out, though. I did see that.
It's a stripe out. There's the revenge factor. There's the fact that, to me, Penn State's offense looks like it's getting better each and every week. I mean, I don't think they're stagnant. I know that the competition has kind of fluctuated a little bit. Kind of mirrors almost what Indiana did. They played Wisconsin, Ball State, then they play Auburn, and then they play Villanova. And again, we've already talked about Indiana's schedule. So, but Sean Clifford threw for over 400 yards and 4 touchdowns last week. We did not see much of that from him previously as a starter. He's starting to click. He's starting to get things really rolling. I think Mike Yursich is very creative. I think every game we're going to see some new wrinkles from Penn State's offense that Indiana is not prepared for. I think each and every game is something different from now until we get to the final week of the season, and then if Penn State's in the Big Ten championship game. And then there's the defense. I just think that Penn State's defense is so locked in right now. And
against a struggling offense.
Exactly, against a struggling offense. And I think, again, once you get to this mindset, we saw it in week 1 against Iowa, and I can't get it out of my mind because I think Penn State's defense, maybe not quite as good as Iowa's, but it's in the same conversation. And so I think if Michael Penix has that first turnover, throws that first interception, gets sacked in front of 107,000 people, then the wheels start turning a little bit. You start to think too much. You start to force things like we saw him do at Iowa. That's where I could see this game going from, okay, it's a hard-fought contest between two. I mean, Indiana's defense is good. I agree with you. I don't think it's a bad defense. But I think things could really get off the rails like they did in that first half against Iowa if you start to force some stuff because of the environment, because of, you throw an interception, you have a bad turnover. I mean, it's imperative to me. I know that Indiana, this is going to be the dumbest thing I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's almost imperative to me that Indiana get the ball first in this game. If they win the coin toss, accept the opportunity to receive.
I don't know. I don't know that I want them to get the ball first. Because here's the thing. They got the ball first against Iowa, and look how that turned out. I don't know that the pressure needs to be on Michael Penix. I feel like if Penn State has the ball first and the defense can do what they do, take a stand, I think that will give Michael Penix more confidence than just coming right onto the field.
But on the flip side of that, in my opinion, is what happens if Penn State scores right away. Michael Penix has been forcing stuff. I mean, that's if they're down 7-0.
If there's pressure on him to get back on the board.
Correct. So maybe it doesn't matter, but if it's me, I want to go out there and I want to try to set the tone in some way, shape, or form. I want to try to control the clock. I want to try to get this at my tempo. Because
that is something that early on in games, minus the Iowa game, that Indiana has done a fantastic job of. If you look at the first half of that Cincinnati game, they had, I think, double the amount of possession that they did against Cincinnati. Now, by the end of the game, it was almost identical time of possession. So maybe that's the key factor. If Indiana can hold the ball longer than Penn State, that could be the reason that they're in this in the end.
Well, right, and don't have turnovers in the red zone like you did against Cincinnati, and don't have turnovers in the red zone like Wisconsin did against Penn State, because those have been two key factors, I mean, in a game for each of those teams. So, again, Penn State has been good at forcing turnovers. Indiana has been sloppy on offense in its two biggest games, and the fact that you have to play this game on the road is really what gives me some hesitation about how this game could turn out.
And one thing I keep going back to in my head, I don't know that I've said this on the podcast before, but we've talked about it off air. During the very first episode, we were just hypothetically talking about what's going to go down in this Indiana-Iowa game. And I brought up the hypothetical, what happens if Michael Penix throws an interception on his first drive? And you said, don't do it again. Well, obviously don't do it again, but look what has happened since then. First of all, that happened. He threw an interception on his first drive. He threw a pick six.
And then he did it again.
And then he did it again and again.
We had like a crystal ball, and we didn't even know it. We were like looking into the future of the most.
I didn't make that realization. I didn't make the realization that had actually happened until a couple of weeks ago. Either I was like, man, that thing that we talked about with Penix, with basically worst case scenario situation happened. And not only was it worst case scenario for that game, it has followed him throughout the season so far. Now, he did. I don't think he threw a pick against Idaho, but it's Idaho. He didn't throw a pick against Western Kentucky, but it's also Western Kentucky. I would have expected, even though I knew WKU had a good offense, it was probably going to be a shootout. I thought if this game would have been more of a shootout, it would have been like 49-45, not 33-31.
Right.
Indiana still needs to finish drives. There were too many times against that WKU team where they'd get down to the 20-30 and they would just stall out. That's why you saw Michael Penix throw 373 yards, but no touchdowns. Right. They settled for too many field goals. And I don't know if I want to call it settling for field goals, but they just weren't getting it done. They weren't getting more first downs to keep the drives alive.
Well, I think you can say it because Tom Allen said it. He said we could basically said the same thing. We couldn't finish drives. We had to settle for field goals. We took Charles Campbell kicked too much in that game, but to his credit, he made them all. I mean, that was exactly what he said. So it's good that you have that weapon to be able to kick field goals, to be able to keep you at least get something on those drives. But that you're right. I mean, I would go back. I don't know what I'm going to probably look this up right now that you bring it up, because I'm interested to know what Indiana's red zone touchdown percentage is. Maybe it's higher than what I think it is. Maybe it's because of that, because of the Idaho game, but it can't be very high based on what we saw against Western Kentucky and what we saw against Iowa. Well, they've scored.
One thing that really just driving me nuts. I don't have this stat right in front of me.
11 touchdowns on 19 attempts inside the red zone. So, I mean, that's not a great percentage. It's at about 58% basically. That's not, you want it to be probably closer to 65. So not ideal, but it's not god awful.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that I think that will improve the better that Indiana has the better that Michael Penix's confidence increases. I don't know that I worded that the best, but I think one issue that could be plaguing Penix's head is the fact that he just hasn't seen a ball go from his hand into the end zone and be caught by his own teammate in quite a while.
Yeah.
I feel like that's more of a basketball thing that I'm kind of thinking of. A lot of people think that shooters get in their head. They just need to see the ball go in the basket. I don't know that it works that way in football, but when you're somebody who is supposed to be as prolific as Penix, obviously you want to see that go in. When you want to be able to say, okay, I'm back on track. And even though he had a decent game, and the reason I call it decent is because he still didn't throw. He wasn't finishing drives. I mean, this game against Western Kentucky, say they still get 31 points, Indiana could have had probably maybe 17 more points if you get rid of some field goals and turn them into touchdowns. And so, I mean, like I said, the defense is one thing in that game, but I think we're still kind of waiting to see Michael Penix get back to what he's supposed to. And maybe we won't see that anymore. I think that's something that I'm struggling to come to terms with. Maybe we're not going to see Michael Penix be what he was prior to this year.
Well, I mean, I think I don't want to judge him after just 4 games and after 2 poor performances, but I think that's a very real possibility. I mean, when you look at the injury he's coming back for or coming back from, it can't be easy. And I made this comment in multiple shows, whether it was this podcast or Indiana Sports Beat or whatever. But to me, it wasn't so much about his leg. It wasn't so much about the knee, the injury that he was coming back from. It was, what's his thought process going to be like when he gets hit? What's he going to be thinking when somebody's rushing him? What's going to be his process if he has to move on the run? Like, I just was concerned about his mental state. Is he going to try to get the ball out too quickly? Is he going to, take too many sacks? Is he going to throw it away? I think there's been a little bit of all of that. I mean, not quite the sacks. I don't know what the sack total is on him, but I think that I legitimately think it's more of a mental thing. And it's compounded right now by the fact that you have 4 touchdown passes and 6 interceptions, and all 6 of those came in your 2 biggest games, and you lost both of them. So I think that there's a lot more. We talk about football being a game of inches, and it's really right here, in my opinion. And I know that's a stupid coach cliche, but it's to me, I think it's very real for Michael Penix right now. Maybe there's more to it. I'm not his doctor. I don't know. I'm not Michael Penix. I don't know what kind of pain he's feeling or if he's actually at 100%. So there might be more to it. I just think that there's a lot of the way I have seen him play. I think that there's a lot of mental going on with him right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. And trying to move on from that point, I think that this going into more of what this game means as a whole for Indiana. And I think and I'm tired of talking about the fan base. The fan base is what it is. I don't. If they're fragile, they're fragile. They've been showing out so far. It doesn't matter. For Indiana itself to be successful, I think this game is going to be a very good gauge at where they're at now and possibly what they're going to look like the rest of the season. Because if Indiana thinks they're a contender and they're in this game, we're going to see it somehow. Because Penn State, as far as the college football world is concerned, is the top team in the Big Ten right now. You could say Iowa is. They're both neck and neck. It doesn't matter. The way that Indiana performs in this game, and you'll be able to compare them side by side. You already have what happened against Iowa. Now you're going to see what happens when they go on the road against Penn State. So they're going to be – I know they're games apart. Every game has to be something apart from the other one. But if Indiana lays another egg, I think – and this is a conversation I've been trying to avoid, and I've kind of been getting on other people for bringing this up. But if Indiana lays an egg, we're going to be talking about will Indiana get to bowl eligibility. And I'm not talking about if Indiana comes out and loses by 3 points to Penn State. Right. I'm talking about if they lose 35-7 or something like that. Then we're talking there's a problem. Right. And I think, if the score is 35-7, this is just off of not this being a hypothetical and me trying to guess what would happen. My first thought is going to be something's got to happen with Nick Sheridan.
Well, I don't know if that's going to happen mid-season, but
I'm not saying jump to conclusions with the coach right now, but that's where I think it's going if that's the kind of outcome that happens this weekend.
Well, I don't disagree. I think you have to look at everything at the end of each season, and if your offense isn't producing, and they're not really producing at any – well, I shouldn't say that. They haven't produced in their two biggest games. We'll see what happens on Saturday. But, this might sound silly, but what I want to see out of Indiana is what I saw out of Rutgers on Saturday against Michigan. They got down big early, and it looked like Michigan was just going to march down the field every time they touched the football, put it in the end zone, and win by 40 points. And in the second half, I think Michigan did take their foot off the gas a little bit, but Rutgers, they fought, man. Pardon me, but they're full of piss and vinegar, right? You don't want to play that team. To me, they're like a Northwestern of the East. They're a team that, maybe they're overmatched.
Man, that's a interesting thing to say because you're immediately comparing Rutgers to somebody who's gone and won their division. What, I guess 3 out of the last how many years?
Put Rutgers in the West Division right now. Would they be in? I think they would be in consideration. I'm not saying that Rutgers. I'm not going to say. Yeah, I'm not going to say Rutgers is competing. They're at the top of the Big Ten, but I'm saying if you don't bring your lunch, if you're not ready to play that team, they're going to get you, or at least they're going to be feisty enough to put you. I'm telling you, I think a lot of Ohio State fans are going to be very nervous on Saturday.
I think everybody
not for 60 minutes, but they're going to. The way they played Michigan, the way they fought, that team does not go away. They scratch and claw and bite and anything else they can do, stomp your toes to get back into a football game. And that's what I want to see out of Indiana. I want to see them scratch.
Well, that's what they used to be.
Yeah, and to your point, if Indiana loses and drops to 2-3, but they look competitive, if they look like they have a little fire in their belly, then I think it's a different story than if they look like they did against Iowa.
Yeah, and one last thing before we move on and get into some of the other matchups, I think this is the game where we're going to see Indiana unlock the entire playbook, especially if this thing is getting down to the wire. We're really going to see what all they have in their offensive arsenal. And if that's not successful, then, there you have it. They've thrown everything out onto the field. And so that's just an observation. I don't want to call it an observation. It's a prediction I kind of have about what might happen in this game. And I do think this game could be close. I don't want to say will be. I'm tired of saying something will happen and then not happening. I think it just makes you look stupid.
Well, I do that all the time.
It's college football. And we make predictions. We say this stuff all the time, but I feel like I've been wrong a lot. And usually I feel like I'm not wrong. And so in my head, I've gotten to this point where I'm just like, I need to stop saying something is going to happen and just say that it could happen. Maybe that's not good, but that's just where I'm at with that.
It doesn't matter. It has no. I mean, I put a lock on Michigan State covering 3.5 against Nebraska, and they didn't cover. I mean, what? And there's nothing that's going to happen to you. People call you out on Twitter.
True.
That's what makes it.
I had a kid. I don't want to call him a kid. I guess you can say a former colleague of mine, try to come at me on Twitter the other day. Again, during the Indiana WKU game, when I wasn't even saying anything bad about Western, they quote tweeted something that I had said. The tweet was, I would like to see this WKU offense go up against Ohio State's defense, just because the way Ohio State's defense has been playing right now. Let's see if this prolific WKU offense what they could do against an Ohio State defense. And he responded with something about half of Indiana's players being on the injury report next week. So I don't know. He messaged me and we worked things out, but I don't understand what people trying to pick a fight on Twitter.
You worked things out. Hey, that's big. That's big right there.
Like I said, it was a former colleague of mine from down in Western whenever we did. I couldn't tell if he was trying to pick fun or if he was genuinely pissed, because I get it. It's a big game. You want your team to come out and upset like that. Right. But the manner in which it happened, I was surprised about, because I wasn't taking a shot at WKU. But anyway, that's besides the point. Moving on to this weekend in the Big Ten, we've got a first. It's not a full slate of conference football, but it's the first week where we've had a majority of conference matchups, and I think there's a lot of interesting things to look at. And at the very top of the list, a Friday night game, number 5 Iowa at Maryland against let me slow down. A very good Iowa team against a Maryland team that I don't think either of us thought was going to look this good early on.
No, I did not at all. I didn't. I have to apologize publicly to Mike Loxley, because I did not think that this would be what we saw at Maryland through the first 4 games. I thought at best case scenario, we were looking at a 2-2 team, and they are 4-0, and they look like a team that could be very competitive. I still don't think they're quite at the level that Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State are playing, but I think they're a notch below. I think they, just like Rutgers, I think that they could beat any team on any given Saturday the way they're playing right now. They have Makers. Talia Tungavailoa, I think, is the best quarterback in the Big Ten right now. I mean, this team got better on defense. The offensive line, to me, a lot of people are talking about how good it is. I think it's a little shaky still. We'll find out some things this Friday against Iowa, but this is a fun team to watch, and I didn't think I'd be saying that about Maryland at this point in the season.
And the other thing that makes this interesting is the fact that Iowa had to scratch and claw their way back into a game against Colorado State this past week. Yeah, and I don't think that I would have had so much issue with this game for my pick'ems had Iowa taken control or been more in demand of that game or command of that game against Colorado State.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, but I also think that, I mean, I don't know. I come back to a little bit of the factor of you had to play Indiana and you had to play Iowa State your first 2 weeks. Then you have a big game against Maryland coming up. How much were you really invested in the college?
But they also struggled against Kent State the week before a little bit. So you're giving Iowa the benefit of the doubt that Indiana's not getting for the schedule that they've had because they haven't come out on top in their games.
Because they got blown out and they have red zone turnovers constantly.
But here's the thing, though. In those games, first of all, the Iowa game was effectively a blowout. There were things they could have done to make that a closer game. The Cincinnati game, they had won, and they pulled a Nebraska and shot themselves in the foot way too many times.
Also, hold on. I'm not giving Indiana the benefit of the doubt. I just told you to forget about the score in the Western Kentucky game because I don't think it matters. The important thing is that they got to win. The important thing for Iowa is that they got to win. They found a way to win.
That's true. That's true. So I guess let's go ahead and just say who we're going to – I think we're going to have a difference on this one, Dustin. You want to go first or want me to go first?
I'm going with Iowa. I think – and here's why. I think it's going to be a close game. I'm picking Iowa because, again, I don't think that you can throw the ball as much as Maryland throws it and win against Iowa. I think that's the big factor.
The same thing that Greek said about Indiana against Iowa.
Yep. The one thing I will say about Maryland is they are very they do a good job of getting the ball out of Talia's hands pretty quickly. So it's not big plays. They try to pick up chunk yardage at times. They can extend the field and go deep, but Talia's not going to try to throw it 20 yards down the field every single time. That's to me is the difference. But I still don't think that they'll be able to throw the ball on that secondary and that linebacker group and escape with a win.
And you may be right, but I'm taking the latter on this one. I'm taking Maryland. I think this is a good upside opportunity for them. They get to play this game in College Park. Yep. The last time they played in College Park, they came away with a win. I think it's the only other time they played, actually. Is that correct?
No, they played twice, but the other two games were in Iowa City. So this is the fourth meeting, but it's the only in College Park.
And I feel like I'm being deceived slightly because, once again, they got to play Howard and put up 69 points like they did a couple years ago before they tanked the rest of the season. But for now, I'm taking Maryland with the upset. Right now, I mean, I think Iowa, regardless of what happens, they still have a chance to win the Big Ten West. But I think Maryland's upsetting this time. And like I said, it's just a heart pick maybe, but I'm taking the Terrapins. Next up, we got number 14, Michigan at Wisconsin. I think this is a matchup, again, going into the season. I feel like a lot of people thought this is something that Wisconsin would probably dominate coming into this. But now with the way that Michigan has improved already and the way that their running game specifically is the most prolific in the conference against another team that's historically known for having a good running game. This could be some classic, what do they call it, 3 yards in a cloud of dust football game we got here between Michigan and Wisconsin.
Yeah, it really could. I tell you what, this game has me scratching my head, and I would stay as far away from betting on this game as possible. Wisconsin opened up, I think, as like a 2.5 or 3.5 point favorite in this, and I can't figure out why. Yeah,
because they did not look competitive at all against Notre Dame. Going back and looking at it,
well, they had the lead in the fourth quarter. They were up 13-10 before they completely imploded. So okay. And then Michigan played really well in the first half against Rutgers and took their foot off the gas and almost, I mean, that game could have gone to overtime. So this is tough for me because neither quarterback has shown me that they can lead a Big Ten offense. I think that Michigan's rushing attack is better than Wisconsin. So for that reason, I'm going to pick Michigan. But that's a tough game. I think with the way those that could be like a 6-3 game.
Hey, a first 1 to 10 points wins kind of game.
You're not kidding. That legitimately could be the.
Now, but if Michigan, I do think that this can get out of hand if Michigan can get going quickly and actually put some points on the board. Because it feels like anytime Wisconsin so far this year has played anybody, it's like I just go back to when I watched the Penn State game specifically. We went through 2 hours of that game and it was 0-0. And so, this could be more of the same. Who knows? But I'm taking Michigan as well. Stepping out of the conference-on-conference matchups for a second, Charlotte at Illinois. The reason you see Illinois playing a non-conference here, I guess, is because you had that Week 0 game with Nebraska when no one else was playing football. But this Charlotte team upset Duke on the road. And I would say Illinois – I don't think Illinois is as bad as Duke, but they're in that same tier of whether you call it rebuilding or collapsing. Illinois themselves isn't collapsing, but in that tier of teams where you have people who are in the bottom feeder type of tier at the moment, trying to get out of it, or some people may be falling into it.
Illinois is 1-4, but 3 of those losses are by 1 possession. So I'm going to take Illinois in this one. I think they get over the hurdle.
I can see this being a similar situation to what happened with Minnesota and Bowling Green last week. I'm not picking Charlotte. I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm also going to take Illinois in this one. So moving on, we've got a few more. We're about halfway through the slate after this one, actually. Minnesota at Purdue. Minnesota, as I just said, lost to Bowling Green. It was at home, correct? They didn't play down in Bowling Green, Ohio?
It was at home, yep.
A week removed from shutting out Colorado 30-0, I don't know if they were just taking a break and they just didn't expect anything to come out of this Bowling Green matchup, but I didn't watch the game. I'm not going to sit here and act like I know what happened, but I don't think anyone thought that they would have lost that.
I'll tell you what happened. They couldn't throw the ball. Their defense was phenomenal. Here's the thing. Everybody's going to look at what Purdue did last week beating Illinois, and everybody's going to look at what Minnesota did last week. They're going to look at the records. Minnesota's 2-2, Purdue's 3-1. I think Minnesota matchup for Purdue. I think Minnesota wins. You look at how they're able to move the ball on the ground. Purdue's defense struggles. Minnesota cannot pass. So will we see a quarterback change? They do get. I think they're going to have Chris Ottman-Bell back. We'll see. He only played a few plays last week, and that really affected Minnesota's game plan. So, how much was that a factor? And Minnesota's defense is really, really good. And I don't know. Purdue saw a really good defense against Notre Dame, and they couldn't move the ball. I think this is going to be a tough one, isn't it? I think this is going to be a close game, but I think Minnesota actually wins.
So what is, like I said, you may know more than I would. What's the issue with Tanner Morgan? I mean, is it one bad game and they're really considering a quarterback change?
I mean, he hasn't played well all season. To me, it's a combination of they don't have the same sort of playmakers at the receiver position as they've had in the past. Their pass blocking is okay, not great. I think offensive coordinator, I think that's an issue. I think Mike Sanford is maybe not the right answer for them. So I think that plays into it. But again, this, to me, when you look at the holistic, when they get Chris Ottman-Bell back, they're going to be more consistent. And by the way, you look at Purdue's injury, King Doru is going to be out for a while. Payne Durham may not play. David Bell's still in concussion protocol. There are a lot of guys that are injured for Purdue. I think this is going to be a good game. I wouldn't be surprised either way, but I just have the feeling that Minnesota is a matchup nightmare for Purdue.
You may be right. I'm going with the home team on this one, though. I'm taking Purdue. So I'm genuinely surprised. I thought you would go with Minnesota, with Purdue on that one. But so there you go. That's another close one, another toss-up, a coin flip, if you will. A few more games. Number 11, Ohio State at Rutgers. And I think we haven't mentioned this yet, but the Kayvon Pope situation. Running off the field,
yep.
Getting on Twitter with an expletive and then being removed from the team. Against Akron, of all teams. Coming into the season, Akron was the lowest rated FBS opponent or team in the FBS.
Well, I just want to point out that I told my staff that when I saw what was happening on the sideline at Ohio State, I'm like, get ready because he's going to go to his phone when he gets in that locker room and he's going to tweet something. I've been doing this long enough to know that in these sort of circumstances, I knew that there was going to be a tweet put out there. So that was like my one major correct prediction this week.
And that's one of those things where I don't know if were you anticipating it? Like, let's find this tweet before it gets deleted because that kind of stuff's going to happen. And then they're going to realize that was really stupid and it's going to get them in trouble.
I mean, yeah. Anytime you do that, that's you take the screenshot of it. I'm sure people have done that with stuff.
No, it's definitely there. I've seen the tweet, but I don't know if you were on the case or if you had somebody saying, be on the lookout for something because it's not going to be there very long.
Oh, well, I mean, I go through the process of finding the tweet and then taking a screenshot of it and saying, here it is for when this inevitably gets deleted. I mean, it's on. I have the text.
You did that. You went through and you found it before. Okay.
Of saying, here's the screenshot for when that inevitably gets deleted because it's going to happen. Okay. Because you can't leave that out there if you're going to enter the transfer portal. I mean, some coaches may not care.
People can see it anyway. But because some people, especially if he ends up being out of anyone on the Power Five's radar because of that baggage. Someone in the CUSA or MAC will be like, let's get somebody from this Ohio State roster and we'll try to work his kinks out, his behavior, and we can make him a prolific player on this team. And that will inevitably happen no matter what happens.
And the thing about it is I don't want to pile on him because I don't know the situation, right? Like we don't know what happened on that sideline. We don't know what the conversation was like with other players, with other coaches. So it's not – but – usually when there's going to be something that's going to happen in that sort of situation. So it's bizarre. Ohio State's defense has had trouble. This is why I actually really like Rutgers not to win in this game, but I think they're going to make it close. I think that you're going to see what you saw last week. Maybe it's not as close as what Michigan was, but I think that there's going to be Ohio State fans that are clinging to their seats when they see that score throughout the game on Saturday.
Do you think Ohio State, just based off what you've seen right now, what do you think their final record will be? Do you still think they'll win out?
No, I think they'll probably finish 10-2, but that's because I'm really high on Penn State. I think Penn State.
Yeah, I say Penn State.
But the people,
if they do, what a bounce back after the horrific they dealt with last year.
Don't. The sky's not falling in Columbus. Trust me on that. They will be fine. It's just a matter of how fine they're going to be. I mean, I know the championship or bust, and I know I'm on my soapbox here, but I don't see this team winning fewer than 9 games. I mean, I think they're going to win 9 games no matter what happens, and that's
fair.
I think that's worst case scenario.
The only way that I feel like you could say if it is worse than that, and you start to see them lose games, multiple games that they're not supposed to, you can go back specifically to the situation that happened this past weekend with that player and say that there's probably some internal problems if it ends up being like that.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we don't need to jump to conclusions, but that's just something to keep an eye on. Obviously, I'm going to say obviously because this could end up being an upset, but I'm taking Ohio State as well. You did say you were taking Ohio State, didn't you?
Yeah. Okay. I like Rutgers to keep it close, not to win.
Yes. You said maybe not as close as Michigan, but yeah. Moving on. A game that I mentioned earlier, Western Kentucky at Michigan State. I think if you're an Indiana fan and you want to feel better about what happened last week, you want WKU to roll in to East Lansing, put up a bunch of points and make this close. I don't know that's going to happen. Michigan State may have a better defense than Indiana will or did. Plus, this game is a road game for WKU. They're not going to have a record crowd. That's another thing. Indiana played against a record-breaking crowd. Who would have thought that Indiana would be able to draw in a record crowd against anybody? Now, obviously, when you're a group of 5 team, you don't have hardly any Power 5 matchups at home. But at the same time, it's still Indiana, as you mentioned before, a historically horrible program. But people down there know that Indiana has had the rise that they've had over the past couple of years. But enough about that. The prolific offense of WKU going against Michigan State. I think this is going to be less than 10-point deficit. You can knock me on the head if I'm wrong, but I think that this is going to be a 10-point game or less go ahead.
I'm not bold enough to predict an upset here, but if I was going to pick an upset, I think this would be the one because
over Maryland, Iowa.
When you look at how Western Kentucky played last week, when you look at the situation, Michigan State, I mean, they're coming off of a big time win over Nebraska. Then do they play Indiana in 2 weeks or after this?
They do. Well, no, it's in 2 weeks. It is in 2 weeks. They may have a bye as well. Indiana has a bye next week, so
it could be a bit of a sandwich game a little bit. So I think Michigan State survives, but I agree. I think it's going to be close.
Like I said, Indiana fans will probably. I mean, obviously, it doesn't matter what happened, especially if Indiana gets blown out by Penn State. It doesn't matter what happens in that game, but you could feel better about it if Western Kentucky makes this a close one. 2 more: Northwestern at Nebraska. Man, Nebraska is just – it feels like every game Scott Frost is fighting for his life. And we say this every week, but it just seems like Nebraska football is a reality show right now. Every week the spotlight is on them in one way or another. I'm not saying that this Northwestern-Nebraska game is a gigantic matchup, but at the same time, you are playing against the Big Ten West defending champion. That's significantly weaker, I would say, than last season. So I do think Nebraska is going to come out on top. Most of this emotion is just based off what happened last week when they played Michigan State and had that overtime loss. That's where I'm getting those comments from about it being a reality show. But anyhow, I'm taking Nebraska at home over the Wildcats.
They have not, or they continually find ways to lose games.
To shoot themselves in the foot. That's why I was telling you Indiana specifically with Cincinnati earlier. I'll quit cutting you off, but they're Indiana and Nebraska, and I made this comparison earlier. They're very similar in the ways that they figure out how to lose games that they shouldn't be losing.
Yep, it's like looking in a mirror a little bit. I think Nebraska's defense is way too good. I don't think Northwestern's offense has any answers. So I say this every week. If Nebraska doesn't if they're not stupid with penalties, I think this was the second straight week they had back-to-back false starts, pre-snap penalties. I can't remember for sure. They had some special teams gaffes. Eliminate that dumb stuff, and I think that Nebraska can win this comfortably. Having said that, these teams have played in the last 4 years. No game has been decided by more than 8 points. So I think Nebraska wins, but I think that they're going to sweat it out in Lincoln again.
Like I said, obviously they had their comfortable wins against MAC opponents and FCS opponents and whatnot, but it doesn't seem like they can ever feel comfortable with what they're doing. And there always has to be some sort of issue after the game. Why the game could have been better.
Their fan base would agree with you. Yes.
Our last one, I don't know that I want to call this the game of the week. The reason I made it last is because it's the Indiana game. Because I don't really know that there is a game of the week. There's no ranked on ranked matchups. I guess if I had to choose a real game of the week, it would probably be Iowa, Maryland. You could go as far as say Michigan, Wisconsin as well.
Yep.
At the same time, though, this Indiana Penn State game is still in the spotlight this week. It's at 7:30. It's at night, which is 7:30. You're gonna have to strike out at Beaver Stadium. The revenge game. There's going to be a lot of emotion early on in this game. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, but there is a lot for people to look forward to when it just comes to seeing this at the start.
Yep. And it's a big game for both teams. Indiana's trying to establish itself as a contender and say it's still in the running, and Penn State's trying to get to the Big Ten championship game, get revenge, and hopefully get to the college football playoff. And I say hopefully on their side. I don't think this is going to be close. I really, for the reasons I talked about earlier, I don't see it happening. I just don't have the faith that Michael Penix is going to figure it out. I don't have faith in the offensive play calling. I think the defense is going to be on the field way too much and get worn down. I think this is going to be 38-10 Penn State.
38-10. See, I haven't. Sometimes I have a score prediction, sometimes I don't. And I do fear for if a score like 38-10 happens, there's not much to look forward to in terms of, obviously the 8-4, 9-3 stuff is probably out the window, and you're fighting for bowl eligibility, which is not a position that I think hardly any Indiana fans projected to be in this far into the season. We did talk about the fact that they could be 1-2. The problem is it's not necessarily a good 1-2, especially that first game. Really both of them. The self-inflicted mistakes in both of those games, I don't know that that's going to happen with this Penn State game specifically, though. I think this is going to end up being close. I think we're going to see continued strides from Penix. I'm not predicting Indiana to win this game, though. I think it's going to be close. I need to think of a score prediction. I'm trying to stall this out so I can think of something. I think I'm going to go along the lines of 28-21, Penn State on top. And I think that's legitimate. I think if Indiana can establish itself early, and I don't know if I mean offense or defense, but if they can have some sort of control on one side of the ball, then you can keep this close for the entire time. You're gonna if Micah McFadden plays as good as he did against Cincinnati before his ejection and the entirety of the WKU game, he's on fire now as well, even though the team as a whole isn't on fire. If you have specific players leading their units, I think you can see this team come together and make this a good one.
Yeah,
however, like I said, I'm not predicting. Unfortunately, I'm going with the Nittany Lions as well on this one.
No, I think you're right. There's no doubt in my mind Indiana has the talent to make it close. From what I saw in the Iowa game, from the way they let that Cincinnati game slip away, I just think Penn State's a lot better than Cincinnati. They're probably closer to Iowa's level. And the fact that that Indiana has to play this game on the road at night, to me, there's just too many factors. I think that Penn State is going to be ready for this game, more ready than they've been for any other game on the season based on what happened last year. And the way their offense continues to improve, the way their defense has played all season long, Indiana's going to have to play a near perfect game to have a chance, and I just don't see that happening.
One other hypothetical before we wrap this up. If Indiana is able to pull this out, what does this do for the Big Ten race going forward? Does it become wide open at that point?
Well, I think
it's a vulnerable Ohio State team And if, like I said, if at that point Penn State takes a loss, obviously Indiana's had a Big Ten loss as well. Does the Big Ten East just become, a big octagon ring?
Yeah, you can't call it the Wild Wild West because that's what you got going on in the other division. But I think it's wide open now anyway. I mean, look at what
Maryland and Rutgers.
Rutgers gave
and Michigan State.
Maryland has a big game against Iowa coming up. Ohio State's not playing well, but they're going to get going. Penn State's playing at a high level. Michigan State's the surprise team. I mean, Indiana's they're the only team with a losing record right now, and Penn State's the only other team in that division that has a lot. Well, Rutgers now has a loss. So Rutgers and Ohio State have losses. You still have Maryland undefeated, Michigan State, and Penn State, 4 teams in that division still undefeated. So, I mean, it's a wide open race, and it's a really.
Sorry, I was making my adjustments, trying to get our outro going, man. Oh, well. That's going to do it for this week in Indiana football. Thanks for listening, as always. Thanks to Elton Hayes for joining us, giving us his breakdown of the Penn State Indy Lions. We'll see what we're talking about next week. It's going to be, is Indiana a contender again, or are they spiraling? That's likely the 2 conversations we'll be having, one of 2 next week. So stay tuned. Be sure to listen to Indiana Sports Beat. Tomorrow we'll have Dustin with us on Thursday, and obviously our plethora of guests that we have the rest of the week. So until next time, thanks for listening to This Week in Indiana Football. We'll see you.